Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hello, everyone.
And we're with The Road to Retail. On our podcast, Tracy and I hope to offer insights and ideas for how emerging small and challenger CPG, consumer packaged goods, brands can establish and grow their business.
Bruce and I have been working in CPG commercial operations for over 30 years, working on brands of all sizes. By commercial operations, we mean all aspects involved in establishing and growing brands across channels and platforms. On our show, we bring on guests that are brand founders, leaders, investors, as well as all kinds of suppliers to these emerging brands that are subject matter experts to share their unique insights with the audience.
To keep up with the show, please follow the Road to Retail podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Leave us a review and consider sharing the show with a friend or colleague that may benefit from the content. You can also check out our website at www.road2retail.com and follow The Road to Retail on LinkedIn. Let's get to today's episode. Today's Road to Retail episode is powered by Market Performance Group, MPG, a leading omnichannel commerce agency delivering integrated commercial solutions that accelerate profitable growth. MPG's new growth initiative helps brands of any size win in every channel, whether launching DTC, scaling on Amazon, or entering brick and mortar. Its team, veterans from top retailers, CPGs, and digital platforms, connects brands with consumers across the full funnel, delivering right-size strategies, strategic go-to-market plans, advanced analytics, and deep retailer relationships for exceptional business results. Check them out at marketperformancegroup.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Road to Retail. We're glad you've decided to join us here today. Tracy, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Bruce. Great to see you. I'm very excited about our episode today. So tell us a little bit about who we have.
This is going to be great. So today we're joined by Paul Gerner. Paul's unique background includes stints working for a couple of CPG firms, and then he had a long, distinguished merchandising career at the Texas-based grocery chain HEB. Paul now takes on selective consulting projects. And Paul, welcome to the show, and thank you for your time today. How are you?
Great, Bruce. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We're grateful for your time, and your long career at HEB will be extraordinarily interesting to the audience, plus the fact that you were on the other side of the table with CPG firms. So before we dive into the specifics of the discussion, why don't you take a couple of moments and tell the folks yourself about your background and your long and winding road of your career?
Well, I think winding road is probably appropriate because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to be when I grew up at any point. But I started my career after college as a Marine officer, where I spent about 8.5 years in the Marine Corps. I realized if I was going to be a father, if I wanted to be a father, I needed to be home, and that wasn't going to happen with the Marine Corps. So I made the difficult decision to get out. I went into medical sales, which I hated, but was very formative in developing me. And I'm, in hindsight, very appreciative that I had that time. I then made a very logical jump from cancer to corn chips. I went to Frito-Lay, where I spent a little bit over 3 years. I then went to Nestle, which is what brought me to Texas. After about 3 years at Nestle, I had 3 opportunities to move. None of them sound all that attractive. And just by all kinds of strange reasons, I suppose, I ended up at HEB. I started off at HEB in 2000 as a buyer, category manager. HEB calls them BDMs. I was a buyer on the food side for about 4 years. Then I was a director leading 2 different buying teams within food and non-food at HEB. I then took about a 3-year stint developing HEB's international logistics program, which was great because I got to travel all over the world and meet retailers and vendors from around the world. I missed procurement and merchandising, so in 2010, I came back as a director in procurement and merchandising in drugstore and baby. And then HEB promoted me to vice president, where I took over, continued on with drugstore baby, and I added beauty, health and wellness, financial services, and a couple of other departments to my portfolio. I did that until I retired in late 2022, and then did kind of a hybrid consulting role. I worked with the Emerson Group as well as with L&R Distributors as a senior vice president of merchandising, category development, and forecast and replenishment. Over the years, I've worked very closely with Myers and Wegmans. They're very good friends to this day. And then I had the opportunity to work more, call it on the vendor side, with Kroger's, Albertsons, and some others.
Interesting. So before we kick it to Tracy, Paul, out of curiosity, if you're not a native Texan, where did you originally hail from?
That's a good question. I'm very confused as to where I'm from. I was born in Washington, D.C., but my father was government. And so I grew up in Hong Kong as well as in Rome, Italy.
Wow.
But came back for high school and college to the United States.
Well, Hong Kong and Rome's kind of like Texas. So,
Close.
Tracy, let's kick it off.
Absolutely. So, with our audience being small emerging brands, founders, talk to us, Paul, a little bit about the role that small emerging brands play with retailers. You've got a great, vast retailer, background with some very impressive retailers. So, talk to us a little bit about the role and the importance of small emerging brands to retailers.
Well, I think first off, it's important to set a little bit of context. Coming from HEB, HEB is a high assortment, tailored retailer. So it's in many ways counterintuitive to be high assortment, low price, and tailored at the store level. But the result of that was we really didn't want to be a Me Too retailer. A Me Too retailer is you've got all the major brands and you carry what everybody else carries. We really wanted to differentiate ourselves, not just in service, not just in layout, not just in price, but also in assortment. And so the result of that was we really sought out some of the smaller emerging brands. And very happy to be on the leading, sometimes bleeding edge of assortment. And so with that as context, it sets HEB up as a little bit unique. But, as I've worked with Meyer, Wegmans, Publix, and other, very exemplary retailers, I think there's still a lot of similarities. Because I think one of the themes you're going to hear me speak of throughout this is about profitability, margin, that retailers is very important to HEB and to other retailers. And generally speaking, some of the smaller emerging brands tend to be more profitable and more able to differentiate a retailer than the large national CPG brands. And so, I often observed some of the smaller brands coming in to meet and having, I'll call it an unnecessary humility, or lack of confidence is probably a better way to put it. I think it's important. I think small brands should have confidence as long as it doesn't turn into cockiness. Candidly, a lot of the larger CPGs can be a real pain in the neck. And so it's often more enjoyable and more exciting to work with some of the smaller brands. So, and I can say that, and it may be hard to believe perhaps, but, I can prove it too. HEB actually developed and still has a program called Quest for Texas Best. HEB's sourcing strategy was Texas first, US second, and the world third. And that's just because we want to keep supply chain short. But Quest for Texas Best was really HEB's not attempt, but had tremendous success in taking, I'll call it mom and pop operations who had great product, but they really didn't know how to go to market. And so we kind of along the lines of a Shark Tank would bring small, great idea, potential brands and help them become a brand and enter into HEB. So, I mean, that kind of puts some action behind the talk. But I would say that smaller brands are important, should have confidence, and have a very relevant and important part in HEB's assortment, and I believe in many other assortments too.
That's great.
That's great to hear, Paul. So digging in a little bit deeper there, how does an emerging brand get the attention of a retailer such as HEB? Is it warm introduction? Is it happenstance? You bump into them at a trade show? And I heard what you just said about Quest for Texas Best. Or does HEB constantly monitor emerging brands? And if they see in the data something kind of getting some traction and that's interesting, does HEB ever proactively reach out and call up Tracy and say, hey, man, your brand is doing really well. We might want to talk to you if you're down this way?
So yes to all of the above, Bruce. There's no single way to source products, brands, especially when you look at HEB taking a very global perspective. But I have to say that one of the things that is underlying and is really important to understand is probably the biggest barrier that I have seen HEB and other retailers have towards, I'll call it progress development, and therefore small to mid-size emerging brands, is busyness. I've been on, as I mentioned, on both sides of the fence, and I think everybody is busy, but I really think that retailers are at an entirely different level of busyness. And that's not to paint retailers as a victim, but it's to set the stage of realism to know what is the barrier. Oftentimes it's not competition, it's just the retailer's busyness. So with that being said, HEB actually developed a sourcing department. And that sourcing department is not the end all be all reason or the only way that products are sourced or found. That is their reason for being, and they essentially are a customer of the category managers of the procurement and merchandising department, or the procurement and merchandising department is the customer of global sourcing, and so they're almost like an internal broker. So that's one way that HEB finds some of these brands. We also use syndicated data to use items not carried report from Circana as well as Nielsen. We go to trade shows like Expo East, Expo West, PLMA Chicago, PLMA Amsterdam. So HEB invests a whole lot of money of traveling nationally as well as globally to find some of those hidden gems. We also monitor online sales, websites, and just any way that's possible. And then there are those occasions where brokers bring products to us, or I'll call it a brave brand goes and just comes directly to us. And so there really is no one way to get at it. And for those brands that are looking to get into HEB or other places, I would encourage you not to take a one prong approach. Try it in many, many different ways. I hope does that answer your question, Bruce?
No, I think that's great. To your point, Paul, we've heard it all, and what you just said there at the end, I think, is the main thing. There's many ways to try to get your foot in the door and get some attention. So don't just bank on, I'm only going to talk to people I met at Expo West. I'm going to use contacts if I have it. And certainly if you get an out of the blue outreach from a place like HEB, goodness, return the call.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Absolutely. Be
Yeah.
silly not to.
All right, Trace.
Awesome. So let's talk about presentation. So talk to our audience a little bit about what needs to be, or what do you look for in a presentation from a small emerging brand that will say, I need to consider these guys. So what's important?
Well, there's I guess the qualifier that I'll throw in is survey sample of one. I understand that there are different buyers with different styles that are out there, and so what I'll share are some of the more I'll call fundamental or basic ideas. Very few things are hard and fast rules. But what I found is the old adage when going into a presentation, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. There's the do's and the do nots. And what I would say is, do not use a sanitized version of an internal or a shareholder presentation. This may not be popular to say, but I think it's still true, is inside of your organization, as somebody who's launching a brand or managing a brand, you've drank your own Kool-Aid. But I can promise you that the buyers have not yet had your Kool-Aid. And they're going to look at things from a very non-emotional perspective. So make sure that you're talking to the buyer and not to yourselves. And therefore, really don't use an internal presentation, change the header. I've literally been in presentations where you can see that all they did was change the title. I think I've received Albertsons and Kroger presentations over the years.
Well, then you should have accepted those products and let them sort it out at Kroger.
Yeah, I just didn't have Kroger's new item form handy, I suppose. But I think one of the things that I found, as I look back on ones that really resonated, it were the presentations that answered the hard questions up front. Because what you're going to hear me say throughout this conversation is, at HEB and at other retailers, what they're really interested is, how much can I sell and how much can I make? I've been in businesses, on both sides of the desk, and business ultimately revolves around gross sales and net profit. And everything else is mainly window dressing. Yes, there are some buyers that can become attached to a brand, but that's the rare exception. If you hit the basics on the front end and then get into some of the softer sell, I really think that you're going to set yourself apart. Because I think many presentations have this drum roll that lasts for 35 minutes and then finishes off with a whimper at the very end of the presentation. Go ahead and hit those things that buyer is going to be interested in on the front end, and then start getting into it, because I promise you that he or she is thinking, how much can I sell? How much can I make? And what is this going to do for my category and for my business?
Yeah.
They're going to have different scorecards, but their primary scorecard is a P&L. And so answer those and then start getting into the softer things. What doesn't work is bringing a whole entourage and spending the first 20 minutes of a 45-minute conversation introducing people, the CEO, the brand manager, the product manager, the manufacturing, the logistics, all those things. Everybody loves to be in the meeting, but I can promise you, normally what I would do before a meeting is I'd run a report 10 minutes prior to a meeting. I'd have my ideas, my thoughts, and then I was all ears, but you had me for 15 minutes. So, the old concept of the elevator speech, make sure you got the elevator speech, have backup slides, but you should be able to focus on 5 or 6 main areas. And then the other thing that's really important to understand is that brand folks think about brands, retailers think about items. we are very item focused.
That's good.
And so while you're talking about, what the brand evokes and so forth, I'm tuning out. I'm going somewhere else and thinking, okay, what am I going to have to remove from my set if I choose to accept this item? And so even within the HEB assortment process, we have something called easily substitutable products, or ESPs. So be very real on what is unique about your product, and what it's likely to cannibalize from. Do not tell me that everything's going to be incremental, because it may be incremental for you. It's not incremental for me. It's going to be cannibalizing from something. And that's not a bad thing for a new and emerging brand. I probably want to cannibalize sales from a less profitable item into your item. So the more that you can clearly articulate who the consumer is, what the first, second, third, fourth item in your portfolio you would recommend, who it's likely to cannibalize off of, what my margin is going to be, what my penny profit is going to be. Those are the things I would hit up front.
Yeah. So Paul, that was awesome. So just a couple of follow-up kind of comments and questions. So first off, folks, Paul hit on several things Tracy and I talk about all the time, either in episodes just with us or with other guests. Paul basically said that the category manager cares way more about their category than just your brand. He's also thinking, what is he going to have to take out to put you in? He also just said, don't bring 600 people to the meeting because, frankly, I don't care, and you're burning up your own time. Another thing, Paul, correct me if this isn't, Paul alluded to, keep it short. Don't bring in the 85-page deck. Bring in a short. You're having a discussion, not a lecture, and allow that buyer to ask some questions. You want those people engaged in the discussion, not praying that your meeting ends so that they can go have lunch or lay down in front of a speeding car because you've just bored them to death for an hour. So Paul, I want to dig in a little more here. So how should an emerging brand leader look at and consider their brand from the eyes of the retailer? You gave some good context of, hey, sometimes we're looking for that challenger brand. It might be more profitable, but help the folks who own brands. What's that retailer thinking?
So more context to set up the answer. So I was responsible for about 7% of HEB's business as a vice president of a few departments. Inside of that, so 7% is a minority share. I was not responsible for 93% of the business. But in my little 7% world, I had 2,100 brands. I had, I think, 58,000 items. We had 280,000 items across the store. And 30%, only about 30% of those items were in all stores, meaning 70% of the items were in some stores and not in others. And so if I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. We will bring shoppers to your store. No, you won't. I always said, kind of tongue in cheek, that the only brands we had to have, or that would bring customers to our store, was Harley Davidson and Boar's Head. Those are two, and we didn't sell motorcycles, so that didn't matter. Boar's Head, we kind of had to have, or probably still have to have, and only in certain stores, though. So the point is that your whole life revolves around your brand. My life revolved around 2,100 brands. And therefore, I really was not all that married to any one of them, even the P&G and Unilever and Kraft and Nestle brands, because what their game is they're trying to get line extensions and shelf space. So I can always find items to take out. And so I was never enamored with any large national brand, and on the flip side, any small emerging brand. Now, with that being said, every blue moon, you'd come across a story or a situation where you're like, man, I really want these guys to succeed. But those really truly are the rare exception. So focus on the business basics, understand what is important to the retailer. And I'll say it again, I'll say it 1,000 times. Penny profit, margin percent, and how much can I sell? And what will I have to take out to put your item on the shelf?
Great. Great. Thanks. Trace?
All right, I can't help myself. I've got to ask this a little bit, these two questions. What percentage of brands that you met with when you were a buyer, at the end of the meeting, you're like, so what do they want? They never ask the question, I want to be in 10 stores, I want to be in 200 stores. And secondly, how many brands couldn't get the paperwork filled out, so they were never able to make it to the shelf on a percentage basis?
Well, so let me rephrase it a little bit if I could, Tracy, because HEB is going to put products in the stores they want to put products in. I think most will.
Yeah.
So I don't want to know, and this is going to sound a little bit crass and perhaps arrogant, and my apologies, but I don't want to know how many stores you want to be in. I want to know how many stores you fit in. And how many, and when I say fit, what I really mean is, where do you fall in the prioritization of the demographic and the consumer you're most likely to hit and be attractive to? HEB and many other retailers have clustered their stores, and HEB goes from low, high ethnic stores, low income, to high income, and everything in between, and different demographics. So the more you understand who your core consumer is, the better chance you have of influencing me to put items in. Because your goal on the front end should really be to get into any stores. I'm not going to put you into a very small subset of stores because it's almost not worth my time to go through all the planogram issues and reworks, et cetera. So I think the heart of your question is well intentioned, which is make sure you go for the close. Find out, what are you thinking? Hey, Mr. or Mrs. Retailer, what are you thinking? My recommendation would be X, but how does that fall in with your plans?
Right.
And so I think too often, early on in my career, I was in medical sales, and we were taught never make a statement, ask a question, and make a statement through a question somehow. And that kind of goes to what you guys have both implied, which is get the buyer talking, find out what's important to them, start to find out and figure out if you have a place. And again, that starts with a realistic understanding of your brand, where it plays, where it could play, et cetera. So I don't know, Tracy, if that answers the question.
It sure does. No, that's good. Good, great insight.
Very good.
Yeah. So let's talk about competition. So talk to us a little bit about how a brand should think about their competition. A lot of times it's not who they think it is. And then on the flip side, how does a retailer think about the brand's competition?
So I'll start with the second question first. The way the retailer thinks about a brand's competition is how much money am I making off of them, and how in stock am I with their competition? Do I have issues with them? And is there a compelling reason to replace an existing item? Again, item, not brand. The likelihood of me getting rid of an entire brand is not high. The likelihood of me marginalizing a brand is very high, because I'm going to do that at least once a year in every category, and to some degree 4 times in each category throughout the year at HEB. Those are the times that I can touch the shelf. And then what I think many large brands, medium and small brands don't realize is, I don't care what category you're in, you're competing against bananas. That sounds counterintuitive, but a retailer at a macro strategic level is looking at how they allocate space throughout the store. And That space is both everyday planogrammed space as well as flex and promotional space that's out there on the floor. And internally, as I was, in charge of drugstore, baby, and beauty, I would look at drugstore in competition with baby, in competition with beauty, and allocate space based on how much was selling, how relevant it was to the consumer, and where I could make more money. Above me, folks were looking at center store versus the perimeter and versus other major departments in the store and reallocating space based on sales and profitability. Therefore, it all comes back to how much can I make on this item, margin and penny profit. So I know I sound like a broken record, but the more that a small and emerging brand understands that dynamic, the better off they are to position their product from a business perspective. Yes, the emotion, the brand identity, those things, they're relevant, but you got to start with the meat and potatoes first. Everything that the bones of the skeleton is margin, velocity, and penny profit. The meat are the softer elements.
So, folks, what Paul's just saying, we've heard from a bunch of guests, and given Paul's background at a very respected retailer like HEB, you have to know your math. And we'll talk about in a little bit where a sales agent or broker comes in. If you're going into a retailer you've never worked with before, you have to understand how these buyers are kind of evaluated and graded. And you have to understand there's not 100 levers that they're graded on. There's like 3 or 4. Okay. And Paul keeps hitting on them. Sales growth, it's margin. In some retailers, it's about getting as many promotional dollars as possible. But this is consistent. You have to understand how you're going to contribute to that category growth. Okay, Paul. So let's press on here. In your experience and over the course of your career, whether at HEB or when you were on the CPG side or in your consulting life, are there any consistent best-in-class moves you see emerging brands make? And it's like, look, man, you got to do these 2 things right, or else nothing else matters. What might those be?
Okay, if you're going to limit me to 2, then
No, you can have 102, but usually if you don't get like 2 or 3 big ones right, the rest of them don't matter.
That's right.
So the first 2 are they make money for the retailer and they stay in stock. Those are the first 2 most important. You want to get on the wrong side of a buyer, make less than the category margin, make poor penny profit, and have a service level that is below standard. And oh, by the way, HEB's expectation is 100% in stock. And while that probably makes everybody swallow hard, it was amazing what we learned when we moved into e-commerce. What we learned, because then we had the shopping list of the customer. And when you have the shopping list of the customer, you can know if she had to make a substitution. And, I'll speak directionally here, but my recollection was something like 40%. We were probably one of the best in-stock retailers that we knew of. And we had service levels that were in the 97, 98% range. And then what we saw, probably 96 to 98, depending upon the day. But what we saw when we actually got a hold of the customer's list was about 45% of customers had at least one item on their list that we didn't have. So while we're looking at overall in stock, the customer is saying, I had 60 items on my list or 40, and at least one of them was out of stock. So that's disappointing a customer. So my point is the more we got into the data, the more we saw how ubiquitous out of stocks were from a customer perspective. But to answer your question, make money for the retailer and stay in stock. After that, there's other things that I think are important. One, the brand, have to make a reasonable profit for yourself. I actually saw occasions where small and emerging brands, including private label, would do so much to try and get in to HEB that they weren't making money for themselves. We talk about sustainable business. You don't have a sustainable business if you're not making a reasonable profit. Don't be embarrassed that you're making a profit, because that makes you sustainable. So enough said there. I don't think I have to convince anybody of that.
Right.
As a brand, you got to be reasonably flexible. You shouldn't be Gumby, because there are retailers and buyers who will bend you over and do all kinds of things to try and get you to do their will. Be reasonably flexible, but don't be a complete yes person. I think you need to have a solid pipeline of innovation. And I think you need to be real honest as to what innovation is. Another flavor is not real innovation. But there is innovation that can be in packaging, in logistics, in formulation, but it's got to be something that matters to the end consumer. And a buyer will sniff out lousy innovation in a heartbeat. I think incorporating a buyer into product development ideas can be helpful, or can be good in some situations. And then the thing that maybe even should go first, but I'll put it last, is you got to have a clear win-win-win strategy. Notice that I didn't say win-win. It's a win-win-win strategy. I used to call it my three-legged stool. And that is, if you have a three-legged stool and you pull out one of those legs, you're going to fall over. And so those three legs it's got to be relevant to the brand. So the business endeavor needs to be good for the brand. It needs to be good for the second leg, which is the retailer. And it needs to be good for the third leg of the stool, which is the consumer. If you're not hitting on all three of those, you don't have a good proposition. And you just need to be really honest with yourself. Do you have a win-win-win three-legged stool?
That's some great insight. Wow.
Yeah, that's excellent. So, folks, again, the Road to Retail T-shirts that Tracy's having made, you heard Paul say it. Retailers, there's two things they don't like: brands that don't sell and brands that don't ship. So, and Paul just gave us a rundown of, kind of the best in class moves that emerging brands make. So we can assume that the worst moves an emerging brand could make is to not do those things. Paul, is there anything that is just a disaster that you see emerging brands make? Otherwise, we can push on. I'm gonna think that the good things, if you don't do those, you're doing the bad things. And people probably don't care if you have 10,000 followers if you're doing everything else wrong.
Yeah, so the one disaster that I'll throw out there is not having a level playing field in the market. There are some very attractive retailers that are out there. And it's very easy to take the bait and I'll call sell your soul in order to get into a certain retailer. But I can promise you, especially with the data that's available now, it will be sniffed out by a buyer. And if there's preferential treatment that's going to any competing retailer, be very, very careful. Because the fastest way to piss me off or a buyer off was to find out that they were being disadvantaged. And ultimately, if me or my team is being disadvantaged by a brand or a vendor, then that means we're subsidizing our competition, and that is just not a good place to be. The other thing I think that's important is this is more internal, and I saw it happen more times than you might imagine. The brands that were most tended to be the most successful were driven by business basics, by the sales organization. Where I started to see problems was when you started to have, I'll call it non-consumer driven, non-business driven parts of a supplier's organization influencing unduly influencing sales. And so who might that be? Well, it can be supply chain, it can be packaging. You can save a few pennies by reducing a glue strip or thinning up on the corrugate, but you're going to cause problems. Or you can have HR or marketing or social justice coming in and doing things for PR reasons that ultimately are not consumer focused. You can do all those things, but make sure you start with the consumer, the retailer, and the business proposition first.
That makes sense.
That is sound counsel.
Yes, yes, yes. So this is a juicy topic. So talk to us a little bit about why retailers charge fees and which ones do you think are fair and which ones are not?
Yeah, this would be a hot topic. So
yeah,
now that I'm no longer aligned with any specific retailer, I will say that I can play both sides of the coin in the sense that fees evolve. And there are fees that in isolation make perfect sense. I'll give you an example. When I started at HEB, we charged new item fees. And there was wailing and gnashing of teeth because we did it with some suppliers, not with others. And then we decided we weren't going to. And then what you come to the realization of a real retailer was brand X sold in. I didn't charge them a new item fee. I put 5 items on the shelf. Didn't do very well. Didn't make sense to keep them in all stores. So we reduced distribution, and then we had all of this excess inventory and store returns. And guess who was holding the bag? Well, it was us. It cost a tremendous amount of money just to put an item on a shelf to the retailer. Mm-hmm. If the retailer doesn't charge a new item fee and doesn't charge clearance and markdown, then they literally are taking the full risk of introducing that product onto the shelf. Right. With that being said, I can tell you also that over 22 years, HEB came in and out of charging different fees. And they started to become perhaps too cumbersome in many cases to the vendors, because there was shrink, there were payment terms, there were damages, there were shelf edge fees, there were digital marketing fees, there were ad fees, all these other things. And a lot of different ways to deal with that. Now, with that being said, I think retailers can get a little bit too fee happy. And probably the better way, rather than examining every single fee, is are they in aggregate, do they make sense? Well, I will tell you that if there weren't any, if HEB just got rid of all the fees right now, they'd probably go net negative. And so if there is a benefit and a cost, why should the retailer shoulder that entire burden? Let me give you another example. When e-commerce took off, I don't know, let's call it late, close around 2010 or somewhere around there, maybe a little bit before, and retailers started getting into e-commerce. HEB looked at ship to home, ship to store, curbside pickup, and everything in between, deliver to home. And long story short, we weren't making the money in any of it. And but the one area where we realized we could make money was in curbside, click and collect, pick up at store. But what many vendors don't see, so the result of it was we started charging a e-commerce fee. And so that seems obtrusive and not very friendly, but realize that everything the customer used to do, we had to do for them. So the customer used to get their shopping cart, walk the aisles, pick the product, go through checkout. Now we had to go in and in every single store build on brick and mortar addition and modification. We had to build technology and systems. We had to change our entire warehousing system, and we had to hire people to walk the aisles with carts to pick orders. Then we have to bring in 3 temperature zones. We have to shop 3 temperature zones. Then we have to go into this new place we constructed on the store, put some product in freezer, some in refrigerated, another in ambient. Then when the customer comes within 5 minutes, we've got to reassemble that order across 3 temperature zones, and it all needs to be transparent for the customer. And the customer clearly said, I want this, but I'm not going to pay for it. We tried to charge fees to the customer, didn't work. And so vendors are like, yeah, you need to go e-commerce, and yeah, you need to do these things, but guess who ends up saddling the entire cost? Us. So in that example, there's good reasons. On the flip side, I can play 2 sides of this coin. We also have death by 1,000 cuts, where vendors are charged lumper fees, damages, shelf edge fees, planogram fees, new item fees, clearance markdown, and then on and on. And so I fully understand that. So how do you deal with them is really, I think, the question. And I think some principles that work are have discipline as a vendor, determine what your final dead net sales price to retailers is going to be. It can be segmented to a degree by volume, but it better be realistic. It better not lean into any one retailer unfairly. And then the more the retailer charges in fees, the less you have available for promotional activity.
Right.
But that requires a disciplined approach that unfortunately too many vendors don't have. And that's one of the reasons I would not advise a CEO to go to a new presentation. It's very easy for the CEO of a company to say, yeah, by golly, we can do that. And the salesperson looks to their left. I've seen it a million times, thinking, what the heck did you just give up?
Yeah.
So, these are principles, and I could go on, and I'd probably bore you to death, but I'd be happy for any follow-up or clarification on any of the fees.
No, and that'd be great because, a lot of the emerging brands or small brands or brands that get carved out of bigger firms by, let's just say, private equity, they have no idea the complexities you just talked about, whether it's why am I paying slotting or what's with these markdowns? Why did my store count get cut back? And you've touched on a lot of those. So, folks, you've heard Tracy and I talk about this. Take the time to plan. Don't jump in and think you're going to figure it out as you go. The game is complex. So, Paul, a couple of more questions just around, brands and promotions, and then we have a couple things here toward the end. So how does a retailer such as HEB or others that you've worked at, do they view brands that are legacy, DTC or Amazon only differently than brands that concurrently launch in a digital environment plus brick and mortar? Or are you guys like, Bruce, what did you not hear? How much can I make? How much can I sell? Don't care where it came from. Is there anything in there that people should consider? Because lots of emerging brands, in my opinion, do the right thing, and they might start with their own website to kind of, shake out the bugs and start getting their feet under them before they go to a place like HEB that's going to be demanding. They don't want to hear that you've been in business 6 months. They expect you to perform.
That's exactly right. I think that I'm not so much concerned about your past. I'm concerned about what the future could be. Um, and we all know that you can launch a product in many, many, many different ways. Um, you know, I'm going to use an example, and I'm not speaking out of school here, but I think it's instructive when you look at the Tylenol recall. And so, why do I say that? Well, when Tylenol had their recall, they had some major issues that they acknowledged. They had 483s coming out from the FDA. They had to shut down plants. They were off the shelf for I can't remember how long, but a long time. What was interesting is when they is as a major brand, they were when they were able to get back on the shelf. What they did was they came back in a much smarter way because they had the chance to start from zero with all of the experience they had and relaunch a brand, but they could do it without the sins of the past.
Mm.
And so they really, it's probably a great Harvard case study if it hasn't already been done. But they came out in so many ways that were better. And you know, people think that oftentimes that evolution improves things. Normally doesn't. It's more devolution than it is improvement of things. And it's the quintessential question: if I've only knew then what I know now, what would I have done? And I think many brands find themselves today in a position where they've made short-term, poor, non-strategic decisions that they have to live on for perpetuity. J&J with Tylenol realized their sins of the past and corrected them at relaunch, and it ultimately was better for them. Now, a small brand could do the same thing. If you launch with discipline, you will have a disciplined brand. And that disciplined brand will be more attractive to the retailers in the long run. And now there are those desperate retailers out there that will try and get what they can for this quarter or for this year.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? I'd say stay away from them.
Mhm.
Um,
Good
if,
advice.
if, if you can. And if you can't, just know that you're going to be having to make that bed somewhere down the road. Um, So yeah, so to answer your question more directly, Bruce, I don't care if you launch. I mean, vitamins, minerals, and supplements. Most brands had their beginnings online, and oftentimes it's a great um, what do you call it? Test market for the
Yep.
retailer. I'm not going to hold you against you now. If you say I'm only going to launch in retailer X or retailer Y, and you don't give me the opportunity to sell your product, if it's a viable product, we're going to have longer term problems.
Yeah. So, folks, before Paul and Tracy talk quickly about, promotions, a 483 is when a brand is given notice from the FDA that they're having a quality and/or manufacturing issue that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Um, you know, put it this way, if you remember nothing else, folks, you don't want any of those. And
Yeah.
if you want to work with contract manufacturers, you ask them if they've had any, and if so, when, and how has the resolution gone? So anyway, I just wanted to explain that because that's a juicy one. Tracy?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Paul, talk to us a little bit about how brands should look at their online and in-store promotions when working with a retailer.
So I remember as a category manager in the early 2000s, one of the fundamental principles that was important to drive the best lift on a promotion was to align the TPR, the temporary price reduction, the ad, and the display. So align price, ad, and display. You line those three things up, you're going to get the best overall promotional lift. E-commerce and digital marketing have changed that dynamic. Now, the best way to drive the best lift is through price, ad, display, and digital. Um, it's hard for an emerging or small brand to get all four of those components, but get as many of those lined up as you can. You will be better off if you can get digital plus price, plus display. But if you can't get a display, if you just do price and digital, great. So understand the retailer's approach, look at what they're doing, learn from what they're doing, see how you can participate, and if possible, line those four things up. Or two of the four, three of the four of the four is best.
But Paul, oh, I'm sorry, please finish.
The other thing that I think is really important is a wise man once said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And the result of that is in retail, both vendors and retailers tend to look to promotion too much. If you can't be successful with your base volume, then you are probably going to go poor paying for promotions, et cetera. So this goes back to having a realistic understanding of your strengths and weaknesses of your items, your products, your brands. So understanding base volume versus promoted volume versus incremental volume is important. Promotion does not cure all ills. And it's a very complex metric to determine those three volumes, but some of the syndicated players, data players, can help with that. And then some brokers can help through their relationships with syndicated data, but knowing the difference between those three. But I think the key is make sure your base volume, how you do every day and perform every day on the shelf is really what's most important. Use promotion to drive trial, to drive awareness, maybe even some short-term volume, but be careful. It's a drug that is addicting and is very hard to get off of once you get into it.
Isn't that the truth? But Paul, is it safe to say over the course of your HEB career and your work helping other brands with other retailers, is it safe to say it's best to have one comprehensive plan, not your in-store plan plus your digital plan? They should sort of work together.
100%.
Okay,
100%.
good. Folks, that's key because some of the people we've had on with other retailers, et cetera, and brands, they talked about their digital and then their offline plan, and that's not what retailers want to hear. They want to hear that everything's working together. So, Paul, as we talk about creating demand, a couple of HEB rival retailers that we've had on the show have said things like, hey, getting on the shelf is only the start. The game is getting off the shelf and staying on the shelf through sell-through. We also had a quote that a buyer said, I need you to prove to me you're committed to this brand before you ask me to commit to it. So what do you need to see in a brand marketing or demand plan to go, all right, these guys get it, and it's worth my time to cut them in and give them a shot?
I'm not going to look at their marketing so much. Chances are if they're coming to me, they've probably been online or been somewhere. So it really is going to be about their results. It's also going to be about any real or perceived gaps I may have in my assortment. Or it may have to do with, do I see this new brand or product as a potential competitor to an existing brand that I don't really want to sell? So I need to pause for a minute. We had a strategy at HEB, still do. I will carry what the customer wants to buy. I will merchandise what I want to sell. And think about it this way. I got to carry Gillette. Don't love carrying Gillette because P&G tends to be, pretty dogmatic, very disciplined, great company with great brands, great products, but not always the funnest to deal with from a retailer's perspective. If I can bring somebody in that will challenge them, might be a good thing for me. So really, this goes back again to understanding where your items, where your products, where your brands play, and understanding that there could be some underlying needs that you're not aware of. So that kind of shifted the question, Bruce, I think, because it's really about, are you committed and are you marketing your brand? Yeah, send me a link, but I don't want to see your ads. I want to know that you're committed. I want to know that you have a strategy. I want to know that you're following that strategy. I want to believe that that strategy is solid. Part of that strategy should be marketing, direct to consumer, TV, radio, whatever else. But the fact is everybody is inundated with marketing, advertising, and media.
Right.
So yeah, show it to me, but it's not a main point. And kind of going back to one of our first questions is, if you've got a 40 minutes to present to me, don't spend 10 of it showing me your ad.
Yeah.
Good point, because that's
Yeah.
core to a lot of people's decks. Tracy?
Yep. So talk to our audience a little bit about how retailers view brands who try and maybe go it alone with a retailer, especially a big retailer like HEB, versus working with a sales agent or broker who already doing business with HEB and knows HEB and has a relationship. So how do you view that when somebody comes in by themselves or with a sales agent or broker?
So it depends. I mean, remember, one of the things I mentioned earlier is probably the biggest barrier to progress for most retailers is busyness. There's too much to do, not enough hours in the day, the week, the month, or the year, and just too much going on. One of the things, I think it really is about eyes wide open. What benefit do brokers play? A direct relationship has its benefits. It also has its limitations. A broker, the beauty of that is chances are that broker is representing other product lines. And so as a buyer, I can meet with that broker, who I may have a standing every 2-week meeting with, or even in some cases every week, depending upon what and who they represent. Or it may be monthly, it may be quarterly, but I can knock out 15 different brands or suppliers in an hour meeting and just boom, 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 get through it. So that saves me time. What's the downside? Well, the downside is you don't have quite as much time. The brand may not get the focus they want or think they deserve from the broker. The other thing is brokers can be very efficient because they work at the retailer. So they should understand, how, timelines, process, forms, expectations, priorities, etc. So you can see, as I put both of those out there, there's a good thing and a bad thing. I'll tell you that in hindsight's 2020, after 22 years of experience, I realize now that some of the paradigms I had in the past were wrong. A good example of one of them was, for years, I thought if you're going through a broker, you're paying them 3 or 4% commission. That's coming out of my cost of goods. I could be making more if you didn't have that 3 or 4%. And I realized that was actually quite short-sighted after I thought about it more. And I'll give you my why. My why was, I never went to General Mills, Kellogg's, or any of the big CPGs and said, hey, get rid of your sales guy because I want their salary to go in my cost of goods. It takes people, it takes salespeople to get things done, to execute at the retailer. So what I would say is a good broker is worth their weight in gold. A not so good broker will cost you lots of gold, and they are a hindrance. So there is not a one size fits all. It kind of goes back to what I said when it came down to sourcing: is try everything you can, try every angle. What I would say is interview brokers, because a large national broker that is good at a national level may not be good inside that retailer. The 100% the determination of a good broker, from my perspective as a retailer, was the quality of the sales person, him or herself. And there were good ones at HEB. There were not so good ones at HEB, and you don't want a bad one.
So, Paul, a quick follow up on brokers. In your opinion, is it appropriate if Tracy and I have an emerging brand, we've somehow gotten a meeting using the methods you suggested with HEB? Should Is it appropriate to call the buyer and say, hey, if we're successful with you, or pretend we were successful, well, Tracy and I would be successful. Coming in, is it appropriate to call the buyer and say, "Hey, we're going to need representation at HEB. Who would you recommend we call?" Is that appropriate, or is that kind of like, "Hey, we're not allowed to play favorites. Good luck sorting through it"?
So as a buyer, I probably would have said, you're going to have to do your own due diligence. The more the experience and perhaps wisdom that I got through experience, the more I was able to say, let me give you 3 good brokers to consider and you make the decision. What I never
Perfect.
wanted to do was to specify, here's who you have to go with. And I'm not sure, but it may even be illegal. But I would give them, here's 3 that I can give a positive endorsement to, and then require them to do the due diligence. But what I'd say is, if it comes down to arguing over 3 versus 3.5% commission, I wouldn't do that. Most important thing is a highly respected broker person, not broker house, the person themselves that's calling on that buyer. And then there's also alternatives. I know HEB can be a very daunting, confusing place to do business with administratively, and I've seen that at other retailers as well. There are people who have set up little cottage businesses where all they do is they just fill out the forms for you. And so if you can get the administration down, that's 50% of the battle. Lord help you if you come down to, being in the set room to put together a planogram when you're introducing your product for the first time, and your paperwork isn't right, or your product samples aren't there. Oh, very, very bad. And to the point that the dates are inflexible.
Right.
If you're not there, if you don't hit those timelines, you're out. And that's not because the retailer is being mean and nasty or dogmatic. They're dealing with hundreds of products just to rework the shelf.
Yep. So Paul, as we start to wind this up, we're down to just our last couple of topics here. So over the course of your career, who's had the most influence on your career? And you don't have to name names, but what did this person or these couple of people do for you that really stuck with you over the years? And you're like, man, early on, I thought they were just busting my chops, and boy, am I appreciative as Paul Gerner got a little older.
I've been blessed over the years to work for some really great people, work with and for. Especially being in the Marine Corps, quite honestly, where leadership is the currency. But I have to say, and I will mention a name, Martin Otto. Martin Otto is now, I'm pretty sure he's close to fully retired from HEB, but he was chief merchant, COO, and CFO. And believe it or not, I think he was actually all 3 at one time.
Wow.
And it's not so much about the who is the why. And the why was that, first off, he was brilliant, probably the smartest human I've ever met. He interestingly enough, he was a Harvard MBA, but we had a whole lot of Harvard MBAs at HEB that were not successful. Martin was one of a few Harvard MBAs who was not just successful, but exceedingly so. And the why was not just that he was brilliant, but that he was curious. He asked more questions than he made statements. There was literally no ego in anything that he did. He was looking to do what was best for HEB and had no hidden agendas. He was a straight shooter. He is a straight shooter. And if he put you in a position, he trusted you to run your business, and he expected that you run it well. And he expected that you knew it, that you knew your numbers. He wasn't going to come down and hammer you if you didn't, but it was not going to be pleasant for you in the long run. Incredibly fair. And I know that this is perhaps a little bit on the softer side, but it didn't matter what level of a person you were in the organization. I remember one time I was speaking with him, and Charles Butt, the owner of the company, walked in the room. And most everybody's head turns and wants to get their time with the owner. Martin knew exactly who had walked in, but he was focused on the person he was speaking to, which just happened to be me at the time. But he did that with people at all levels. So great leader, great business person, very much of a forward thinker. I consider him a friend to this day, but he was the best leader that I've ever worked under.
That's awesome. Love
That's
to hear
impressive.
that. So, as Bruce says, rounding third and heading home, our favorite question of the day, Paul. So tell us who your favorite sports team is, band, or brand, and why you follow them.
Well, so here I am living in Texas. I've been here for 28 years, and I am a true Texan, although most Texans won't allow me to be a Texan because I wasn't born here.
Right.
I actually had, this is a funny little story, but I had a guy that worked for me at HEB, and he was living up in Illinois, I believe, and his wife was having their first child. And he had his brother send him a bag of dirt from Texas, and he put that dirt under the delivery table so that he could say that his child was born on Texas soil.
Wow. Great story.
So I was not born on Texas soil. I am a Texan, and therefore I should be a Dallas Cowboy fan or a Houston Texan fan, and I am neither. I grew up as a Redskin fan. I had knockdown, drag out fights with my brother, who was a Cowboys fan. When they started calling themselves the Washington football team, I lost it with them, and I'm slowly starting to gain my way back to an affection for the Commanders. But then outside of that, any Texas team I root for. If University of Texas and Texas A&M play, I'm probably going to root for Texas A&M. And when it comes to music, Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash.
Oh, classic.
The man in black. And I knew you couldn't pick a brand because you've been responsible for whatever you said, 21,000 of them. So Paul, thank you so much for your time. If people have more questions or might need your help, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
So best way is my email, which is paulcgerner@gmail.com, or being retired, I actually have time, and we'll take phone calls as well. Should I give my number, Bruce?
You can. We've had a few insane guests give out their mobile numbers, so go ahead,
Well,
man.
I'll tell you what. Let's leave it at email for now, and after that, maybe we can go to a phone call. But Paul C. Gerner, GERNER @gmail.com.
Paul, are you out on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, Bruce, unless you can coach me up on it, I don't spend much time on it. I don't spend much time on social media, but yeah, I'm there.
Well,
Awesome.
I've only recently escaped from the Amish community, so I'm not sure I'm the one you should be getting social media lessons from. But Paul,
I'll help you, Paul.
All right.
Paul, thank you once again. Okay, Tracy, the big finish.
Absolutely, Paul. This was great. What a great episode. So many nuggets I can't even count. So thank you so much for being our guest today. And audience, please continue to follow us on Spotify as well as Apple or LinkedIn, also YouTube. And then we also have our website, www.road, the number 2 retail.com. And we post every Tuesday, and we'd appreciate a follow. So thank you again, Paul. And thank you, audience, for joining us today.
Good luck out there, folks.